and welcome to our session on containers and AKS. We're here today to show you how you can take Sitecore 10 to the next level. My name's Rob Earlam. I'm a technical evangelist with Sitecore. Been working with Sitecore products for about 14 years now and working for the company for about the last 5.
My name is Bart Plasmeijer. I'm a senior software architect, and I'm working already for 13 years with Sitecore, and I live in the Netherlands.
So before we jump right into this, I just want to talk a little bit about what AKS is. So AKS is Microsoft's managed Azure Kubernetes Service, and it has some really nice features with the managing of it for you. One of those is around elastic provisioning. It makes it really easy for you to add and remove compute resources as and when you need them. Really simple to do. It has a really nice integration with VS Code, meaning you can manage your cluster from directly on your dev machine. It's also really tightly integrated with Azure Active Directory. So if you're already using AAD to manage your identity, then this is going to slot really nicely into your stack. It's available in 36 and more regions, so available across the globe. And one of the key ones for Sitecore is it works with both Linux and Windows nodes. So you can use a really wide range of different resources on there.
Okay, how does AKS work? The developer will push a change to GitHub, and an Azure DevOps pipeline will be triggered. And at that moment, the containers will be built and shipped to the Azure Container Registry. If the AKS cluster is then up and running, you can deploy your containers to AKS. By the Azure Active Directory, you have access to that cluster. External resources like the Azure SQL can be, the services can obtain data from the external services. The end users can connect to the AKS cluster, and the DevOps people can connect by the web interface or CLI to the AKS cluster.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how Sitecore runs on AKS. Well, if you go to dev.sitecore.net today, you can download a full set of Kubernetes specifications. You'll also get a complete installation guide showing how you can walk through from a clean cluster to a fully working Sitecore instance. Step-by-step guide showing you how to go through that deployment process. Do you want to talk a little bit about what is and isn't supported? We will support all our application images, all the way through from development machines, all the way up to your production instances. We do have a couple of images around data storage, so Redis, SQL, and Solr, and these are non-production images only. So you can use those in development, and you can use those in your non-prods, but you can't use those in a supported way in production. When you get to production, you've got a few different options. You could stand up some PaaS instances like Azure SQL, or you can choose to run these data storage elements in containers if you like. You just have to create your own images for them. So this all sounds really good in theory, Bart, but can you show us how easy is it to actually create an AKS cluster?
Sure, Rob. I can show you how we can deploy a cluster. We're going to deploy a non-production cluster, and all the scripts that you will see in this presentation will be shared after the presentation. So let's first create a resource group in Azure and deploy an Azure Container Registry. While doing this one, after that, we were going to create an AKS cluster with a Linux pool, because AKS is Kubernetes runs on Linux, the core. We are going to set a password for the Windows node that we are going to deploy in a later stage. If the deployment of the AKS cluster is done, roughly around 4 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes a little bit shorter, then we're going to assign the Azure Container Registry to the cluster, because we want to grab or pull the images that are stored in the container registry. And that is what we're going to do now. We are assign the ACR to the AKS. Then we're going to deploy a Windows server node. This server node is needed because Sitecore runs on Windows. Still, you can also run a few services in Linux, and maybe in the future more Linux images will be available from Sitecore. So now we are deploying the pool, and we are ready. Then we need to obtain the security, and now we can start deploying some tools. We need to have the AKS tooling, the kubectl command. We're going to install Helm because we want to install some charts. And now we're going to look if the versions of the server and the client are the same. Now we're going to deploy our ingress controller. That will be the option that you can route traffic from your external, from your IP number that you will get from the AKS cluster to your internal services. And now if you look on the dashboard, we deployed the ingress controller. And now we're going to look into the service, and you'll see that there is an IP number assigned to the ingress controller. So that is the number that you need to set in your DNS where you route your traffic to. And now the AKS cluster is up and running. Rob.
That seemed really easy. Okay, so we've got a functioning AKS cluster in Azure running now. How do we actually deploy our application out to it?
Okay, let me show you. We have a few stages, and the first stage that we're going to do is we're going to create a namespace where the instance will be deployed to, and we're going to deploy a few Sitecore secrets like the TLS, user password, etc., etc. And as you can see, I'm going to the secrets now, and you'll see that all the secrets are deployed into that namespace. Secondly, we're going to install the external services, and that means the MS SQL server, the Redis service, and the Solar. We are running a non-production cluster, so that means that we are running these services inside the cluster. Now, all the external services are up and running. And then we're going to deploy the Sitecore init containers. The init containers will set up the MS SQL server and the Solar. Solar will be getting the cores, and the Sitecore MS SQL will deploy all the duckbugs that are needed for this instance. If you run your SQL server not in AKS, but like on the Azure SQL server, you also need to initialize your databases. And therefore, we have the init containers available. As you can see, it's almost done. After that, we're going to, this is almost done. So all the Solar cores are installed. Waiting for the database. And then we will continue with deploying the rest of the services like the CD, CM, and identity server. Okay, deployed, jobs are done, pods are like closed. And now the next step is we're going to deploy our solution and the Nginx routing to our ingress controller. So we are deploying the services, the containers will be created, the pods will be starting up. Inside the pod, containers are starting up. And if everything is up and running, you can see the services. You see the internal IP numbers of the services just inside the cluster, and the ingress controller will expose one of the services, the internal service, to the external IP number that we did get from the ingress controller. It's like a mapping of your service. And now everything looks good. Everything is running. And now we're going to go to the website, and let's open that one. And here it is. you see the Sitecore instances up and running. We can log in. The identity server is going to pop up. We can log in with the password that we did set in the secrets. Now we can create a new item. And the cluster is doing well. Everything, all the pods are running, as you can see. Now we're going to look with the K9S tool. As you can see, I'm using a tool here that is called K9S. You can go into the pods. You can see if everything is running fine. You can show the log files. You can describe the pod. You can see what kind of image is running, what kind of environment variables are set. There is like, you can do everything from the console, but there is like, the K9S tool is a quick tool. You can see the nodes here. There's one Windows node. You can see that on this node, all the pods are running. If you're going to use the autoscaler, then a new Windows node will be created. Then you can see in different nodes where things are running. Looking into the ingress controller again and see the mapping. And you can do a describe on the information. Events tab will show you all the events that are happening in the AKS cluster. If something goes wrong or something is strange, look on the events tab. This K9S tool can run on Windows and on the WSL subsystem for Linux. If you like more Windows kind of interface, use the Lens application. It's also freeware, it's open source. It has the same functionality as the K9S tool. You can roughly go to all the services and endpoints. You can add multiple clusters to Lens on the left side. That will give you easily switch from one cluster to another one. You see the internal IP numbers here of the services. You can edit it directly. If you want to change or test something out, you can change the YAML of the manifest, and then that will be, the change will be applied. Ingress controller. And again, also the events. If you use the K9S tool, you need to switch context. And here you can switch with the sidebar. You can switch easily between clusters. Secrets are stored in base 64. So if you want to change something for testing, you can change that. But normally, if you run a production environment, you should use a key vault, an Azure key vault, or another vault where you have your secrets stored. But for a non-production environment, this is easy. There's Rob. I deployed the cluster and Sitecore is running.
Mate, that was so easy. So as you say, you've built a new cluster out. You've deployed Sitecore to it. Right, so pretty often, well, not at all do you ever just leave one version of an application live. Your developers are going to be working on new features. It's going to come to a point where you need to deploy an update. Is it easy to do that with AKS?
Okay, Rob, I will show you the update. This, what you see here, I'm going to list out the pods that are currently running, and I'm going to do a kubectl. I'm using the command line now. On the right side, you see the K9S tool. And I'm going to list the pods on the namespace that we did created, the Sitecore namespace. And you see all the pods. It's the same view on the right side. Now I'm going to update an image. I created a new container and I'm going to update one. And I'm going to deploy that one. What will happen? The new pod will be created. Until the new pod is like ready and can serve data, it will switch the traffic to the other pod. And then you can see that the new version is deployed, version 2, and the traffic will go to the new pod. If you are not happy with the deployment, you can easily do a rollback. The other pod will be recreated again, the previous pod, and the traffic will be routed back to the other pod when the deployment is done. And it's so easy to deploy a new instance. And now we did do a rollback of the previous. Thus, if you want to test out something, you can do this easily.
That's awesome. Before we move on, I noticed there's some numbers just down in the bottom of the screen. What are they for?
Yeah, that's funny, Rob, that you're asking that. The number, it's like almost 20 minutes. We created an AKS cluster. We created our Windows node pool. We deployed a Sitecore instance on top of that. Everything is up and running, and you can start developing or start serving your traffic to that cluster in almost 20 minutes. I think that is crazy.
It is. That's fantastic. Okay, so I think we're just going to go through a conclusion here, just finish up with a few points. I just want to start with some tips and tricks for you to follow. Kubernetes has been around for a while now. Google open sourced it back in about 2014, I think it was. So there's quite a mature set of tooling out there for you to use today. Things like K9S and Lens that Bart showed you before, and heaps of other tools out there. Make sure you're leveraging those to get the most out of your cluster and just make your day-to-day life a lot easier. Make sure you're leveraging secrets. When you're running applications in containers, the same way when you're running on PaaS or IaaS, you need to make sure you're using secrets. You're not baking those into your images directly. You need to make sure you secure your cluster as well. The same way you'd secure an IaaS machine if you're running in the cloud, you need to make sure your cluster's locked down too. Make sure you're automating your build process, and that automation includes updates from base images. Sitecore are going to be releasing base image updates, which are going to be based on the updated Microsoft OS versions. So you need to make sure that you're consuming those and updating your application images. And finally, you should definitely check out Microsoft's best practices for AKS. They've got a heap of material out there, and it's really, really good.
Perfect. What is also very interesting is following the tutorials on the Kubernetes IO website. And there is a very funny children's video explained in children's with pictures and for Microsoft that will explain you how the Kubernetes works. It's a children's book, and check it out. It's great to look at. Further, check out our Sitecore MVP site that is on GitHub. It's built on the latest technology stack from Sitecore. And you can also see the CI/CD pipeline in action there. Rob also posted a few other videos about that. Just please check out also the videos that Rob are posting on his Docker series. And finally, the scripts that we did that I did use on the presentation, they will be shared on this GitHub repository. And please spin up a cluster, and any feedback on Twitter will be welcome to me and Rob, and we can help you maybe, or join the Docker channel on Slack where we can help you out. Okay, Rob, that was it.
That's it. Thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully that's helpful, and I believe we're going to be around for the next 10 minutes answering questions.
Thank you very much, all.
So welcome to the Q&A part of this session. With me are Bart and Rob. So we're going to jump right into the first question here. And I have two questions that are around container status. If Sitecore will focus more on containers. Bart, do you want to jump into the first question here about container status? Bart, you seem to be muted somehow. Yeah. Rob, do you want to jump in with a couple of words? I can't hear you, Bart.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we're doing all right then. Yeah, so I think one of the questions we got was around whether Sitecore's main focus is going to be containers and the future for that. Definitely is. Containers is the route we're going down. That's the technology we're investing in. And we think there's a lot of benefits around that, as we just explained really in the video. The question also focused on some of the different Azure technologies which we support today and how that's going to change moving forwards. So we have IaaS support today, so you can go and you can go and deploy directly to IaaS machines in Azure, and that's going to remain. You can still go and set that up yourself. You can still go and deploy to IaaS machines. Where things are going to change a little bit is around Azure Pass. So currently today, you can go and deploy directly to an Azure Pass app service. And that technology has actually been deprecated with V10, and support for that will be removed in a later version. It's the same with Azure Search as well. But that doesn't mean you can't use any PaaS technologies in Azure. There's still other PaaS technologies that will be available to you. Things like Azure SQL, AKS itself is kind of a PaaS version of Kubernetes, and even app services. They have a web apps for containers technology, where you can deploy containers into a web app, which you'd be able to use with our container technology as well. Should we try Bart again? I think he might be back.
Are you back, Bart?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Hey.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. What was the question?
Well, it was around containers, but I think Rob have talked very nicely about that. So let's jump to another question. Around Linux.
Yes. At this currently, the current state is that the Linux images are available in the community repository. In the future, Sitecore will also provide Linux images. They are on the roadmap, but now you can take the Linux images from the community.
Okay. If I jump back to Rob here, there was one day that says you talk a lot about AKS for hosting. Can you use other K8 hosts like AWS or Google Cloud?
Yeah, sure. So that's one of the joys about working with containers. Really, it really makes us cloud agnostic. Previously, with our approach being quite tied to Azure App Services, we were pretty tied to Azure. But that's no longer the case. If you want to go and deploy your containers out to AWS or Google Cloud, as you mentioned, or if you want to stand up your own Kubernetes cluster, you could do all of that now. It really does free up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Bart, if we look at some of the other questions that are in here, I have a question around what tools are to be used for CI/CD with AKS and Sitecore.
Yes. Currently, like if you look on the Azure DevOps, all the stuff for managing AKS is inside that. You can have the pipeline where you can deploy Helm charts, you can deploy your Kubernetes manifest. Everything is inside the Azure DevOps. The new GitHub Actions also provides a lot of things there, and it's also provided. And also GitLab has this support. It doesn't matter what you use. All the current CI/CD stacks does have implementation for Kubernetes out of the box available.
I could just add something to that as well. So Bart mentioned that the MVP site has been open source and is available on GitHub today. We have a fully working CI/CD pipeline example in YAML definition in there. So you can go and download that today and use that to configure an Azure DevOps release pipeline.
Sounds good. One follow-up question to that, where are you choosing to deploy in Azure? Would you recommend PaaS containers? It sounds like you just said upgrading a PaaS would be more difficult. Is that something you want to speak to, one of you guys?
So for V10, new projects, we're recommending that all builds start on containers. As I mentioned before, we're going to be removing support for deploying directly to Azure Pass app services. So you're going to have to do that container migration at some point. It's up to you whether you do that at the start of your project. We're recommending you do if it's a new project, because there's no point really in starting on one technology and having to pivot further down the track if you don't have to really.
Excellent. One more question here. I don't know if any of you want to take a stab at. There's one question that says, are there any sizing guidelines for nodes in correspondence to the traffic amount? Bart?
Yes, there is the sizing. Just like if you're going to look in the manifest that we are providing, we have some numbers there. Just there are some resource limits there. We give that.
but still, and that's very nice to use. If you look on the dashboard, for example, in Azure, you can monitor your pods, just all your instances, all your and you can easily adjust these values. Just you can see what kind of load or what you want. It's also if you take, for example, if you're going to take a lower resources, but you use the auto scaling option, for example, in Kubernetes, you can easily auto scale when your load is going up. You can easily set that if your load exceeds something that you're going to scale down or up, and that will also have impact on your cost. So you can run on less pods on your replicate set. So you can run less pods if it is quiet on your side, and you can auto scale automatically out if you have more load on your side. So it depends if you choose a higher machine cluster, and you're going to scale down up. There are all kinds of patterns there that you can use.
I will just say on top of that as well, one of the key things when working with containers or with PaaS today is around performance testing.
Yes.
So we can provide guidelines around how much recommended spec and throughput you can roughly get. And we have those coming out shortly. But there's also, you have to factor in your implementation layer on top of that, which we can never take account for. So once you've finished your implementation, and hopefully ideally during the build as well, you need to make sure that you're performance testing your site. You need to make sure that you know what node size you require to be able to get the required throughput that your customer needs. You're on mute, Christian.
Yeah, I cannot hear you, Christian. Maybe I can comment something about the community. That's maybe something nice to share. From last week, we also provide the SEC channel on the images that we are providing. In the upcoming days, we will release a knowledge base article how we're going to update all the channels. That we will support LTSC channel and we will support the SEC channel. SEC channel will be released after a few. Like it will not be directly on the same day as Microsoft released it, because we need to have a few days to build our stuff, test it, etc., etc. But there will be, our images will be updated on the monthly base. And the good news is also, and that's I think very interesting, that the community images that are now built on Docker images are also available on our Sitecore Azure container registry. Dus if you're going to look into the MD file now of the text that are available, you will see also the community images, also the community asset images, but you will see also the Lighthouse demo that you also did see on some presentations now. So that is also available in the images, all Windows at the moment, and just please check that out. And if you do a pull request on the Docker images and you will bring stuff in, it will be pushed also to our registry if it will be approved and merged in. So that's, I think, very good news for the community again, that you don't need a build server for the community images anymore, because we are going to do it for you.
Excellent. I think we are out of time, if I'm not mistaken. So I know there are more questions, but I don't think we can do any more. So maybe we can do one last question. Do you want to take a stab at one of them, guys? So you said containers were recommended for 10 new deployments. What about 9.3 new implementations? That's an easy question, I guess.
It's going to be the same approach, really, because you're not going to stay on 9.3 forever. You're going to get to the point where you want to upgrade to 10 and our future versions. So you're going to have to adopt the container approach that we're going for, and you're going to get all the benefits that we talked about by going down that route. So definitely, if you're starting off on 9.3 today, I'd say start with containers as well.
Excellent. So maybe a short one. If AKS website has a bug, can you update the config directly to trial something?
Yes, you can. Yeah, it's like very easy to jump into a container. It's like you can copy files in. You can also jump with an editor. You can PowerShell. You can do everything. It's like the same experience that you have with normal. And that makes it also like from the lens, for example, what I did show, the tool or K9S, you can jump directly into that container with the console. and that makes life easy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Like I said before, we did actually have time for a couple of questions here, but I think we're running out of time now completely. So thank you very much for attending the session. If you have more questions, please reach out to Bart and Rob. I think they will be more than happy to engage in conversations with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.